Hello and welcome. I'm so glad you're here tonight. Wherever you are right now, whatever kind of day you've had, you can let it all go. There's nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to be. This time is yours, just for rest, just for listening. Tonight, we're traveling back to ancient Greece, to a time when gods walked among mortals, when music could move mountains, and when love was powerful enough to challenge death itself. We're going to hear the story of Orpheus and Eurydice, one of the most beautiful and heartbreaking tales ever told. It's a story about love, yes, but also about loss, about the limits of what we can control, and about the power of art to touch something divine. It's a story that's been told for thousands of years, and tonight I'll tell it to you. As we go through this tale together, feel free to let your mind wander. Let the images form as they will. And if you drift off to sleep before the story ends, that's perfectly fine. That's exactly what this is for. There's no test at the end, no need to remember every detail. Just let the words wash over you like waves, gentle and constant. So settle in now. Adjust your pillow. Let your breathing slow and deepen. Feel the weight of your body sinking into whatever surface supports you. Notice how, with each breath, you can release a little more tension, let go a little more fully. Our story begins in a Greece you might recognize from statues and paintings, but also one that exists in a kind of dream, where the boundary between the mortal world and the divine was always thin, always shimmering like heat on a summer road. Let me tell you about Orpheus. Picture, if you will, the ancient land of Thrace in the northern reaches of Greece. This was a place of mountains and forests, of wild rivers that tumbled down from rocky heights, of meadows that stretched golden under the Mediterranean sun. The air there smelled of pine and wild thyme, of earth warmed by the day and cooled by mountain breezes at night. In those days, the gods were close. They weren't distant concepts or metaphors, but real presences that could appear at any moment. Zeus might send his thunderbolts across a clear sky. Athena might whisper wisdom into the ear of a warrior. And Apollo, the god of music and poetry and light, might take a mortal woman as a lover and father a child who would inherit something of the divine. The Greeks believed that certain people were touched by the gods, marked from birth with gifts that set them apart. Some were warriors of incredible strength. Others were seers who could glimpse the future in the flight of birds or the patterns of smoke. And some, very rarely, were artists whose work could move the very stones and trees, whose music could make even the gods pause and listen. This was a world where music mattered in a way that's hard for us to imagine now. It wasn't just entertainment or background noise. Music was sacred, powerful, transformative. The right song at the right moment could heal or harm, could call down blessings or curses, could open doors that should remain closed. Imagine walking through a Greek hillside in those ancient times. The sun is warm on your skin, but not too hot. A breeze carries the scent of wild rosemary and lavender. In the distance, you can hear the faint sound of bells from a shepherd's flock. The sky is that particular shade of blue that seems deeper than any sky you've seen, and the light has a quality that makes everything look like it's been painted by an artist's hand, clear and vivid, and somehow more real than real. In this world, in this time, there lived a young man named Orpheus. Orpheus was beautiful, as his father Apollo was beautiful. not in a way that was feminine or delicate, but with the kind of beauty that made people stop and stare, that made them think of heroes from old stories, of statues of gods carved in marble. His hair was dark and curled, his eyes were bright, and when he smiled, it was like the sun breaking through clouds. But it wasn't his appearance that made Orpheus remarkable, it was his music. From the time he was a small child, Orpheus could coax sounds from instruments that no one else could achieve. His mother, the muse Calliope, had given him his first lyre, a small thing made of tortoise shell and gut strings, and he had learned to play it almost before he could walk. As he grew, so did his skill, until there was no one in all of Greece, perhaps in all the world, who could make music like Orpheus. When Orpheus played his lyre and sang, extraordinary things happened. Birds would stop in mid flight to listen, hovering in the air as if held by invisible strings. Wild animals, fierce wolves, and cautious deer would emerge from the forest and sit peacefully together, all enmity forgotten. Rivers would slow their course, as if the water itself wanted to hear better. Trees would bend their branches toward him, leaves rustling in time to his melodies. People said that rocks wept when Orpheus played sad songs. They said that storms would calm at the sound of his voice. They said that even Hades, the god of the underworld, had been known to pause in his dark realm when a particularly beautiful melody from the world above reached his ears. But for all his gifts, Orpheus was not arrogant. He understood that his music was a kind of blessing, something that flowed through him rather than from him. He played for shepherds and kings with equal grace. He sang at weddings and festivals, at funerals and celebrations. His music was generous, offered freely, shared without expectation of reward. Orpheus lived simply. He had a small house on a hillside, surrounded by olive trees and overlooking a valley where a stream ran silver between green banks. He would spend his days walking the hills, his lyre slung across his back, playing for anyone who would listen, or for no one at all. He seemed content with this life, with his music and his solitude, but there was a loneliness in him too, a kind of emptiness that even the most beautiful music couldn't quite fill. He was surrounded by people who admired him, but he had no one who truly knew him, no one who saw past the gift to the man beneath. He would sometimes sit on the hillside above his house as the sun set, playing melodies that spoke of yearning, of something missing, of a space inside him that echoed like an empty room. The gods, watching from Olympus, saw this loneliness, and perhaps they took pity on him, or perhaps they simply wanted to see what would happen if Orpheus, who had everything and nothing, finally found what he'd been seeking. In any case, fate was stirring. Destiny was preparing to bring two souls together, and nothing, not even the gods themselves, would be able to predict what would come of it. Her name was Eurydice. She was a dryad, a nymph of the trees, daughter of the wild places and the green growing things. She lived in the forests that covered the lower slopes of the mountains, in the company of other nymphs and the gentle spirits of nature. Her days were spent dancing in forest clearings, weaving flower crowns, singing songs that had no words but were full of joy. Eurydice was lovely in the way that wild things are lovely, not polished or perfect, but alive, vibrant, real. Her hair was the color of autumn leaves, brown and golds and copper all at once. Her eyes were green like moss, like the heart of the forest. When she laughed, it sounded like water over stones. When she moved, she seemed to flow rather than walk, as graceful as a deer, as natural as the wind. She had lived her whole life in those forests, knowing every tree, every hidden spring, every secret path. She knew where the wild strawberries grew sweetest, where the best mushrooms could be found after rain, where the ancient oaks stood that had been old when the world was young. She was part of the forest, and the forest was part of her. But Eurydice, like Orpheus, felt something incomplete in her life. She loved her sisters, the other nymphs, but their concerns seemed shallow to her. They cared about beauty and pleasure, about dancing and games. Eurydice wanted something more, though she couldn't have said what. She would sometimes wander away from the others and sit alone by a stream, trailing her fingers in the water, feeling a restlessness she didn't understand. One day, Eurydice heard music. It was coming from somewhere higher up the mountain, floating down through the trees like smoke, like mist, like something made of air and longing. She had never heard anything like it. The nymphs made music, of course, singing and playing simple flutes, but this was different. This was a music that seemed to speak directly to something inside her, to that unnamed yearning she'd always felt. She followed the sound. Through the forest she went, moving quietly as only a dryad can move, barely disturbing a leaf as she passed. The music grew stronger, clearer, more achingly beautiful. It spoke of loneliness and hope, of beauty and sorrow, of questions that had no answers. It made her want to laugh and cry at the same time. And then she emerged into a clearing at the edge of the forest, and she saw him. Orpheus sat on a flat rock, his eyes closed, his fingers moving across the strings of his lyre. The late afternoon sun turned his dark hair to bronze. He was so absorbed in his music that he didn't notice her standing there at the tree line, didn't see her frozen in place, her heart suddenly racing in a way it never had before. She stood and listened until the song ended, until the last note faded into the quiet afternoon. And then, as if he'd known she was there all along, Orpheus opened his eyes and looked directly at her. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, something that neither of them could have named, but both of them felt. It was like recognition, as if they'd known each other in some other life, some other time. It was like coming home to a place you'd never been before. Orpheus stood slowly, carefully, as if afraid she might vanish like morning mist. "I didn't mean to disturb you," Eurydice said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't," Orpheus replied. I think, I think I've been playing for you all along. I just didn't know it until now." And so it began. In the days that followed, Orpheus and Eurydice spent every moment they could together. He would come to the edge of the forest each morning, and she would be there waiting, smiling that smile that made his heart feel too large for his chest. They would walk together through the woods, talking about everything and nothing, discovering each other like explorers charting unknown territory. Orpheus played for her songs he'd never played for anyone else, songs he'd never even known he could create. With Eurydice, his music became something new. It was still beautiful, still powerful, but now it was also intimate, personal, full of a warmth and tenderness that it had lacked before. He played songs that made her laugh, and songs that made her cry happy tears, and songs that made her close her eyes and sway like a tree in a gentle wind. Eurydice showed Orpheus her forest, all the secret places she'd discovered in her long life among the trees. She took him to hidden pools where the water was so clear you could see every pebble on the bottom, where dragonflies hovered like jewels in the air. She showed him meadows where flowers bloomed in such profusion that the ground looked like a painter's palette. She taught him the names of plants and birds, the signs of weather changing, the old ways of reading the forest's moods. They talked endlessly, discovering that they shared a similar soul, a similar way of seeing the world. Both of them felt things deeply, almost too deeply. Both of them found beauty in things others overlooked, a particular quality of light, the pattern of bark on a tree, the way shadows fell across stone. Both of them had lived with a sense of being slightly apart from others, of seeing things from a different angle, but together that apartness vanished. With each other, they were wholly present, wholly themselves, wholly understood. I feel like I can breathe properly for the first time, Eurydice told him one evening as they sat by a stream, watching the water turn gold in the setting sun. I know, Orpheus said, taking her hand. It's like I didn't realize I was holding my breath until I met you. The other nymphs teased Eurydice about her mortal lover, but gently without malice. They saw how she glowed, how she seemed to carry light with her wherever she went. Even the forest seemed to respond to her happiness. Flowers bloomed more brightly where she walked. Birds sang more sweetly. The very air seemed to shimmer with joy. Orpheus's friends were equally happy for him. They'd watched him for years, admiring his music, but worried about his isolation, his loneliness. Now they saw him transformed, his music even more beautiful, his smile coming easily and often. You're going to marry her, aren't it? His friend Theron asked one day. Orpheus nodded. If she'll have me. She'll have you, Theron said, laughing. Anyone with eyes can see how she looks at you. And so, as spring turned to summer, Orpheus and Eurydice made their plans. They would marry at midsummer, when the days were longest and the world was most alive. It would be a simple ceremony, there in the forest Eurydice loved, with the nymphs and Orpheus's mortal friends in attendance, and perhaps some of the minor gods who took interest in such things. Everything was perfect. Everything was as it should be. They were young and in love, and the whole world seemed to smile on them. But fate, as it does, was preparing its turn. The day of the wedding arrived bright and clear, the kind of day that seems made for celebration. The forest clearing where they would exchange their vows had been decorated with garlands of flowers, white and gold and deepest purple. The nymphs had woven crowns of ivy and roses. Someone had found amphorae of wine, good wine from the southern islands, sweet and strong. Tables had been set up, loaded with bread and cheese and honey, with olives and figs and grapes. Eurydice wore a simple dress of white linen, with flowers woven into her copper gold hair. She looked radiant, almost luminous, as if she were lit from within. The other nymphs fluttered around her like butterflies, adjusting her crown, smoothing her dress, giggling and chattering with excitement. Orpheus wore his finest tunic, dyed a deep saffron yellow, the color of celebration and joy. His hair was crowned with laurel, sacred to his father Apollo. His lyre hung at his side. He stood with his friends, trying to appear calm, but his hands shook slightly with anticipation and happiness. The ceremony itself was brief and simple. An old priest of Zeus spoke the traditional words, asking the gods to bless the union. Orpheus and Eurydice clasped hands and made their vows to each other, speaking words that were both ancient and completely new, because every couple who speaks them means them in their own way. I will love you, Orpheus said, with all that I am, with all that I have. My music, my life, my soul, all of it is yours. I will love you, Eurydice replied, tears shining in her green eyes, for all my days, in all the ways I know, and in ways I have yet to discover. My heart is yours, now and always. They kissed, and the assembled guests cheered, and it seemed for a moment as if even the trees joined in the celebration, their leaves rustling in a sound like applause. The feast began. Wine flowed freely. Orpheus played his lyre, songs of joy and celebration, and everyone danced. The nymphs were graceful as always, their movements like flowing water. The mortal guests were less elegant, but equally enthusiastic. Even some of the forest animals joined in, drawn by the music and the joy, dancing in their own fashion at the edges of the clearing. Eurydice danced with her new husband, her dress swirling around her legs, her face flushed with happiness and wine. She had never been so happy. She felt as if her heart might burst with it, as if joy itself might lift her off the ground. I love you, she said to Orpheus as they moved together to the music. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love anyone. And I love you, he said, beyond music, beyond words, beyond anything. The sun moved across the sky. The shadows grew longer. The celebration continued, mellower now, people sitting in small groups, talking and laughing, enjoying the warm evening and each other's company. As the light began to fade, some of the younger nymphs suggested a game, a kind of chase through the forest, an old tradition for weddings. Eurydice, ever playful, agreed. She kissed Orpheus quickly and ran off into the trees with the other nymphs, their laughter echoing back through the forest. Orpheus smiled and settled back against a tree, content to rest for a moment, to let the happiness of the day wash over him. Around him, his friends were engaged in conversation. Someone was refilling wine cups. Someone else was telling a long, meandering story that kept getting interrupted by laughter. The light continued to fade. The forest grew dimmer, shadows pooling under the trees. And then, cutting through the peaceful evening like a knife, came a scream. Orpheus was on his feet. Before he knew, he was moving, running toward the sound, his heart hammering in his chest. Around him, others were running too, all heading in the same direction, toward that terrible scream that seemed to still echo in the air. They found the nymphs gathered in a small clearing, and when they parted to let Orpheus through, he saw her. Eurydice lay on the ground, her white dress stained with earth and blood. Her face was pale, twisted with pain. One of the nymphs knelt beside her, cradling her head, tears streaming down her face. A serpent, the nymph said, her voice breaking. She was running. She didn't see it. She stepped on it, and it struck her on the ankle. We tried to stop the venom, but it was so fast, so fast. Orpheus fell to his knees beside his wife. He took her hand, and it was cold, so cold. Her breathing was shallow and rapid. Her eyes found his face, and she tried to smile. Orpheus, she whispered, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. No, he said, and his voice sounded strange to his own ears, hollow and distant. No, you're going to be fine. We'll get help. We'll find a healer. You're going to be fine. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. He could see death in her face, could see it settling over her like a shadow. The serpent's venom was already doing its work, already stopping her heart, already pulling her away from the world of light and air and life. I love you, she said, her voice barely audible now. I love you so much. Eurydice, please, Orpheus begged. Please don't leave me. Please. Her hand squeezed his, weakly, and then her eyes closed. Her breathing stopped. The terrible tension went out of her body all at once, and she was still. In the sudden silence, a bird sang somewhere in the trees, a lonely sound in the gathering darkness. Orpheus didn't move. He stayed kneeling there, holding Eurydice's hand, staring at her face as if he could will life back into it through sheer force of wanting. Around him, people were crying, speaking in low, shocked voices, but he heard none of it. There was a roaring in his ears, like a great wind, and he felt as if he were falling, even though he was kneeling on solid ground. Someone tried to pull him away, gently. Orpheus, come. There's nothing more you can do here. But he couldn't move, couldn't stand, couldn't do anything but kneel there in that clearing, holding the hand of his wife, his bride, who he had married only hours before, who he had promised to love for all his days. The cruelty of it was breathtaking, the impossibility. That morning she had been alive, laughing, dancing. That morning they had made promises to each other. That morning the world had been full of nothing but joy and possibility. And now she was gone, taken by a serpent, a creature acting on pure instinct, without malice or intention. A random event, meaningless, pointless, that had destroyed everything. Eventually, they carried Eurydice's body away. They prepared it for burial, according to the customs, washing it, wrapping it in white cloth, placing coins on her eyes for the ferryman who would carry her soul across the river Styx. Orpheus watched all of this as if from a great distance, as if it were happening to someone else, in some other life. They burned her body on a pyre as the sun rose on what should have been the first morning of their life together. The smoke rose into the pale sky. The nymphs sang songs of mourning, and Orpheus stood silent, his lyre hanging from his hand, unable to play, unable to sing, unable to do anything but stand and watch as everything he loved turned to ash and smoke and drifted away on the morning wind. The days that followed were dark, so dark that Orpheus sometimes wondered if the sun still rose, or if the world had slipped into permanent twilight. He couldn't eat. He couldn't sleep. He certainly couldn't make music. The very thought of touching his lyre made him feel sick. He stayed in his house on the hillside, the house that had seemed so welcoming, so full of promise, and now felt like a tomb. His friends came to visit, bringing food he didn't eat, offering words of comfort he didn't hear. They meant well, but there was nothing they could say, nothing anyone could say, that would change the fundamental fact of what had happened. Eurydice was gone. She was gone, and he would never see her again, never hear her laugh, never hold her hand, never grow old with her. All the future they had imagined together, all the years they should have had, gone in an instant, stolen by a serpent's bite. At night, Orpheus would lie awake and remember. He remembered the way she looked when she emerged from the forest that first day. He remembered her laugh, bright and clear as bells. He remembered the way she would tilt her head when she was thinking, the way she would bite her lip when she was amused but trying not to show it. He remembered the softness of her hand in his, the smell of her hair, pine and flowers, and something sweet that was just her. And he remembered her last words: I love you. I love you so much. The pain of the memories was almost unbearable, but he clutched them anyway because they were all he had left of her. He was terrified that he would forget, that time would blur the details, that her face would become indistinct in his mind. So he forced himself to remember every detail, every moment, as if by remembering he could somehow keep her alive. But remembering wasn't enough. It would never be enough. On the seventh day after her death, Orpheus walked down to the stream near his house and sat on the bank, watching the water flow past. The water didn't care that Eurydice was dead. It just kept flowing, as it always had, as it always would. The world continued on, indifferent to his pain, and it was then, sitting by that stream, that the thought came to him. Eurydice was dead, yes. Her body had been burned, her ashes scattered, but her soul, her essence, that wasn't gone. Not really. It had simply gone somewhere else, to the underworld, the realm of Hades, the place where all souls went after death, the underworld, the land of the dead. No living person went there. It was forbidden. The boundary between life and death was absolute, or so everyone believed. The living lived, and the dead stayed dead, and that was the natural order of things. But Orpheus had never been very good at accepting things as they were, and the more he thought about it, the more the idea took hold of him, growing from a whisper to a shout. What if he could go there? What if he could descend into the underworld, find Eurydice's soul, and bring her back? It was madness, of course. It was impossible. But then again, people had said his music was impossible too, and yet he played songs that made stones weep. If his music was powerful enough to affect the world of the living so profoundly, why couldn't it affect the world of the dead? He thought about this for a long time, as the sun moved across the sky and the shadows lengthened. He thought about the risks, about what might happen if he failed, or worse, if he succeeded but in some way that he regretted. He thought about what Eurydice would say if she knew what he was planning. But in the end, the decision was simple. Life without her was unbearable. If there was even the smallest chance of getting her back, he had to try. Even if it meant going to the underworld, even if it meant facing Hades himself, even if it meant dying. Orpheus stood up, wiped his eyes, and went back to his house. He took down his lyre, the instrument he hadn't touched since the wedding, and ran his fingers across the strings. They were out of tune, dusty with neglect. He tuned them carefully, patiently, and then he began to play. At first, the notes were rough, uncertain, but gradually his skill returned, muscle memory taking over. And as he played, he began to sing, a song of grief and determination, of love that was stronger than death, of a journey that he knew he had to make. Tomorrow, he would begin. Tomorrow, he would find the entrance to the underworld, and he would descend into darkness. He would face whatever horrors waited there, and he would find Eurydice, or he would die trying. There was no other choice. There never had been. Section 3. B. The Descent. 1,200 words. The entrance to the underworlds, Orpheus had learned, was in a cave in the far north, in a place of desolation and shadow where few mortals ever went. It took him days to reach it, walking alone through increasingly barren landscape, carrying nothing but his lyre and his determination. The cave mouth was like a wound in the earth, dark and forbidding. No plants grew near it, no birds sang. Even the wind seemed to avoid the place, leaving only an oppressive stillness. Orpheus stood at the entrance for a long moment, gathering his courage. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to leave this place, to return to the world of light and life. But he thought of Eurydice, and he stepped forward into the darkness. The descent was long and steep. The path wound down and down, through tunnels of stone, into depths where no sunlight had ever reached. Orpheus had brought a torch, but it barely pushed back the darkness, which seemed to have a weight and substance of its own, pressing in from all sides. As he went deeper, he began to see things moving in the shadows, spirits, ghosts, the shades of the dead. They drifted past him like smoke, barely substantial, their faces hollow and empty. They didn't acknowledge him, didn't seem to see him. They just moved through the darkness with no apparent purpose, no destination, trapped in whatever moment of their death had defined them. Orpheus played his lyre as he walked softly, and the music seemed to help, pushing back the darkness a little, giving him courage. Some of the shades paused when they heard the music, turning their empty faces toward him, as if remembering something from their former lives, some distant echo of beauty and joy. Down and down he went, until he reached the river Styx, the black water that separated the world of the living from the realm of the dead. On the bank was a ferry, and in the ferry was the ferryman, Charon, ancient and bent, his face hidden in the shadows of his hood. "I need to cross," Orpheus said, trying to keep his voice steady. Charon turned his hooded head toward him. "The living do not cross, only the dead." "I must," Orpheus said. "I must find someone I lost." "Many have lost someone," Charon said, his voice like rustling leaves, like earth settling on a coffin lid. "The dead do not return. Please," Orpheus said, and he raised his lyre. "Listen." He played then and sang, a song of love and loss, of a love cut short, of a heart breaking. He sang of Eurydice, of her laughter and her grace, of the life they should have had together. He sang of the cruelty of fate, of death that came too soon, of a love too strong to be contained by the boundaries of life and death. And as he sang, something extraordinary happened. Charon, ancient and unmoved by millennia of dead souls crossing his river, began to weep. Tears ran down from beneath his hood, splashing on the deck of his ferry. "I will take you," Charon said, his voice breaking. "Though it is forbidden, I will take you." Such love should not be denied. Orpheus boarded the ferry, and Charon pushed off from the bank. They glided across the black water in silence, and Orpheus looked down into the depths and saw faces there, the faces of the drowned, pressing up against the surface, their mouths open in silent screams. On the far bank, Orpheus stepped off the ferry and continued his descent. The path led through fields of asphodel, pale flowers blooming in the eternal twilight, and past the three judges who sat in judgment of the dead, deciding their fates. They looked at Orpheus with surprise and perhaps with anger at this breach of the natural order, but they did not stop him. He passed through regions of punishment where the wicked suffered for their crimes. He saw Tantalus, forever reaching for water that receded from his grasp. He saw Sisyphus, pushing his boulder up a hill only to have it roll back down. He heard the screams of the damned echoing through the caverns of the underworld. But he didn't stop. He continued on toward the center of the underworld, toward the palace of Hades himself. And finally, he arrived. The palace was carved from black stone, vast and dark and cold. Guards stood at the entrance, terrible creatures with the heads of dogs and the bodies of men. But when Orpheus played for them, they too wept and let him pass. Inside, the palace was like a nightmare made of stone. Everything was black or gray, colorless, lifeless. And at the end of a long hall, on twin thrones of obsidian, sat Hades and his queen, Persephone. Hades was tall and stern, his face like carved rock, his eyes as dark as the void. Persephone beside him was beautiful but sad, a goddess trapped in the underworld for half of each year, remembering the light of the world above. Orpheus approached the thrones and knelt. His heart was hammering in his chest. He had come so far, risked so much. Everything depended on this moment. Lord Hades, he said, his voice echoing in the vast hall, I have come to ask for the return of my wife, Eurydice. Hades looked at him with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall, that had witnessed all the sorrows and joys of mortal life, and found them equally fleeting and meaningless. Your wife is dead, Hades said, his voice deep and cold. What is dead remains dead. This is the law, older than the gods themselves. I know, Orpheus said, but I ask you to break that law, just this once. She died before her time. She died on our wedding day. We had no chance to live our lives together. It's not fair. It's not right. Fair? Hades said, and there might have been a trace of amusement in his voice, though it was hard to tell. Since when has death been fair? The young die and the old linger. The innocent suffer and the guilty prosper. Death comes to all in time. This is the way of things. I know, Orpheus said again. I'm not asking you to change the nature of death. I'm asking for mercy. I'm asking for one soul to be returned, one life to be restored, that's all. You ask for much, Hades said, more than any mortal has asked before. I know, Orpheus said for the third time, but I have something to offer in return. He lifted his lyre. I will play for you, he said. I will sing. And if my music moves you, if it touches something in you, then I ask that you grant my request. If it doesn't, then I will accept your judgment and return to the world above alone. Hades was silent for a long moment. Then he gestured with one hand. Play then. Let us hear this music that gave you courage to descend to my realm. Orpheus lifted his lyre and began. He played the song of his love for Eurydice. He sang of the first moment he saw her, standing at the edge of the forest, how the world had seemed to stop and remake itself around that single instant. He sang of their courtship, of walks through sun-dappled groves, of laughter and conversation, of the slow unfurling of love like a flower opening to the sun. He sang of their wedding day, of joy so complete it seemed impossible that the world could hold it. He sang of the moment when everything changed, of the scream in the forest, of holding her as the light faded from her eyes. He sang of grief, of a pain so profound it seemed to reshape the very fabric of his being. And as he sang, the impossible happened. The torches in the great hall flickered, though there was no wind. The guards at the doors wept, tears running down their monstrous faces. The spirits that haunted the palace, the servants and attendants of death, all paused in their endless tasks and listened, and their colorless faces showed something like emotion, like memory of what it meant to feel. Persephone, who knew what it was to be torn from the world of light, who spent half her life in this dark place, openly wept. Tears streamed down her face as she listened to Orpheus sing of love and loss, and she reached out and took her husband's hand. And Hades, ancient and stern, lord of the dead, who had seen countless millions of souls pass through his realm, who had hardened his heart to suffering long ago because that was the only way to bear the weight of his responsibilities, Hades himself felt something crack inside him. He remembered, listening to that music, what it was to be young before he became lord of this dark realm. He remembered sunlight and laughter. He remembered what it was to love, and he understood, perhaps for the first time in millennia, the true cruelty of death, not as an abstract principle, but as a lived reality, a breaking of bonds that should not be broken. When the song ended, silence filled the hall, a silence so complete it was like a physical presence. Finally, Hades spoke, and his voice was rough as if he too had been weeping. "You have moved me," he said. "You have moved me in a way I did not think was possible. Your music, it speaks of truths I had forgotten, or perhaps truths I never wanted to remember." He stood from his throne, and when he moved, the very darkness seemed to shift and flow around him. "I will grant your request," Hades said. "Eurydice will be returned to you. She will follow you back to the world of the living, back to the light and air and life." Orpheus felt his heart leap, felt a joy so intense it was almost painful. "Thank you," he said, his voice breaking. "Thank you, my lords." "Thank you?" "But," Hades said, and that single word fell like a stone into still water, sending ripples of dread through Orpheus's joy. "There is a condition." Of course there was a condition. There was always a condition. The gods did not give gifts without prices. "What condition?" Orpheus asked, though part of him didn't want to know, wanted to just accept and run, to flee this dark place before Hades could change his mind. "You will walk back to the world above," Hades said. "Eurydice will follow behind you, but you must not look back at her. You must not turn around, not even once, until you have both reached the sunlight. If you look back, even for an instant, even at the very threshold of the living world, she will be pulled back to this realm forever, and I will not grant you another chance." Orpheus felt something cold settle in his chest. Don't look back. It sounded simple. It sounded easy. But he knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that it would be the hardest thing he had ever done. "Do you accept these terms?" Hades asked. What choice did he have? To refuse would mean leaving Eurydice here forever. To accept meant risking everything on his ability to do one simple thing: walk forward without turning around. "I accept," Orpheus said. Hades nodded. He raised one hand, and from the shadows behind the throne, a figure emerged. Eurydice. She looked pale, insubstantial, like a ghost, but she was there. She was real. And when she saw Orpheus, her face lit up with joy and disbelief. "Orpheus," she said, her voice like a whisper, like wind through leaves. "Is it really you?" "It's me," he said, wanting desperately to run to her, to hold her, but not daring to move toward her. "Not yet. I've come to take you home." You came to the underworld for me? Tears were streaming down her translucent face. You faced death itself. I would face anything for you, he said simply. Now come, let's go home. And so they began the long journey back. Orpheus walked in front, his lyre strapped to his back, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. Behind him, he could hear Eurydice's footsteps, faint and ethereal, barely a whisper of sound. But she was there. She was following him. They were going home. The path seemed longer going up than it had coming down. Every step felt like an eternity. The darkness pressed in from all sides, thick and suffocating. Orpheus focused on moving forward, on placing one foot in front of the other, on not thinking about anything except the next step and the next and the next. Behind him, Eurydice walked, her insubstantial feet making almost no sound on the stone path. She wanted to call out to him, to tell him she was there, to thank him for coming for her. But something stopped her. Perhaps the solemnity of the moment. Perhaps the sense that any word, any sound, might break whatever spell or bargain held them together. They passed through the fields of asphodel, past the judges, across the river Styx, where Charon ferried them in his boat without a word. Up and up they climbed, through the tunnels of stone, through the darkness that seemed to go on forever. And with every step, doubt began to creep into Orpheus's mind. Was she really there? He could hear footsteps. Yes, but they were so faint. What if it was a trick? What if Hades had lied, had sent him away with nothing, with only the ghost of hope? What if he reached the surface and turned around to find nothing behind him but empty air? The doubt grew with each step, whispering in his ear, gnawing at his confidence. He strained to hear her footsteps, and sometimes he thought he could hear them clearly, and sometimes he couldn't hear them at all, and the uncertainty was agony. Trust, he told himself. You have to trust. Hades gave his word. She's there. She's following. Don't look back. But it was so hard. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around, to check, to make sure. Just a glance, just a quick look over his shoulder. What harm could it do? He wouldn't be really turning around, not fully. Just a peek to confirm she was there. Number. No, he couldn't. Those were the terms. Not even once. Not even at the last moment. He clenched his fists and walked on. Behind him, Eurydice struggled with her own doubts. She was so tired. The climb was hard, harder for her than for him, because she was still more spirit than flesh, still caught between life and death. Sometimes she stumbled, and when she did, she had to stop for a moment to gather her strength. And each time she stopped, she fell a little farther behind. She tried to keep up, tried to stay close, but the distance between them grew, and she wanted to call out to him, to ask him to slow down, to wait for her. But she was afraid that if she spoke, something would break, some fragile thread that connected them. So she stayed silent and struggled on, falling farther and farther behind. Ahead, Orpheus began to see light, faint at first, barely distinguishable from the darkness, but growing stronger with each step. Real light, sunlight, the entrance to the cave. They were almost there. His heart began to race. Almost there, almost home, almost safe. But the footsteps behind him had grown even fainter, and now he wasn't sure he could hear them at all. Panic seized him. What if she had fallen? What if she had been pulled back by some force of the underworld? What if she was lying somewhere in the darkness behind him, unable to go on, calling for him in a voice too weak to reach his ears? The light was so close now. He could see the mouth of the cave, could see green growing things, could smell fresh air. Almost there, just a little farther, but the silence behind him was unbearable. He couldn't hear her at all now. Nothing, not even the faintest whisper of a footstep. She wasn't there. She couldn't be. Something had happened. He had to turn around, had to look, had to see if she was all right. Every rational part of his mind screamed at him not to do it. You're almost there. Just a few more steps. Don't look back. Don't do it. But love is not rational. Fear is not rational. And Orpheus, in that moment, was ruled entirely by love and fear. He turned around. For one perfect, terrible moment, he saw her. She was there, just a few steps behind him, her hand reaching out toward him, her face a mixture of joy and exhaustion and love. Orpheus, she said, and her voice was the most beautiful thing he had ever heard. And then her face changed. Joy turned to horror as she realized what he had done. Her eyes went wide. Her reaching hand began to fade, becoming translucent, then transparent. No, Orpheus said, reaching for her, trying to grab her hand, but his fingers passed through her like smoke. No, Eurydice, no. I love you, she said, her voice already fading, already distant. I will always love you. Eurydice, he screamed, but she was vanishing, being pulled back by forces he couldn't see, drawn inexorably back to the underworld. No, please, Eurydice. He tried to follow her back down into the darkness, but invisible hands held him, pushed him back. The laws of the underworld would not allow him to return, not now. He had been given one chance, and he had squandered it. In seconds, she was gone, disappeared into the darkness like a dream upon waking. And Orpheus was left standing at the threshold between light and dark, between life and death, alone. He fell to his knees and howled, a sound of such anguish that the birds in the nearby trees fell silent, that the wind itself seemed to pause. He had had her. She had been right there, following him to life and light, and all the years they should have had together. And he had lost her, not to fate or accident this time, but to his own weakness, his own doubt. It was his fault, all his fault. He stayed there at the mouth of the cave for a long time, hoping against hope that she would reappear, that Hades would take pity on him, would give him another chance. But the darkness remained empty. The underworld kept what it had claimed. Finally, as the sun began to set, Orpheus stood on shaking legs and walked away from the cave. He didn't know where he was going. He didn't care. The world above, which had seemed so precious, so vital, now felt hollow and meaningless. What was the point of life without her? What was the point of music or beauty or joy? What was the point of anything? He wandered through the wilderness for days, or maybe weeks. Time had lost all meaning. He didn't eat. He barely drank. He just walked aimlessly, carrying his lyre but never playing it, because what song could possibly express the depths of what he felt? People who saw him were shocked by his appearance. The beautiful young man who had made such extraordinary music had become a gaunt, hollow-eyed ghost. He looked more dead than alive, and perhaps, in the ways that mattered, he was. Some tried to help him, offering food or shelter, but he refused them all. He wanted nothing from the world. The world had taken everything from him, twice over, and he would take nothing from it in return. Finally, he came to a desolate hillside overlooking the sea. The grass was brown and sparse. The wind blew cold off the water. There were no trees, no shelter, nothing but rock and sky and the endless murmur of waves. Orpheus sat down on that hillside, and there he stayed. Section 4. See the end and the meaning. 950 words. Days passed, seasons changed. Orpheus sat on the hillside and did not move. Sometimes people came, drawn by stories of the great musician who had descended to the underworld and almost rescued his wife from death. They came hoping to hear him play, hoping for wisdom or comfort or understanding. But Orpheus said nothing, did nothing. He just sat and stared out at the sea. Some legends say that eventually he began to play again, that after a long silence he picked up his lyre and made music once more. But now his songs were so filled with sorrow that they made the very stones weep, that his music became a kind of mourning that echoed through the world, a monument to love and loss. Other legends say that he never played again, that his grief was so complete it silenced him forever, that he sat on that hillside until one day he simply ceased to be, worn away by sorrow like a stone worn smooth by endless water. And still other legends say that a group of women, followers of Dionysus, found him on that hillside. They were wild with religious ecstasy, and when Orpheus refused to join their revels, refused to make music for them, refused to honor their god, they tore him apart in their frenzy. They scattered his body across the countryside, and his head, still singing, floated down the river to the sea. Perhaps all of these endings are true in their way, or perhaps none of them are. The truth of myths isn't found in their facts, but in what they mean, in what they tell us about ourselves and the human condition. What does the story of Orpheus and Eurydice mean? Perhaps it means that love is stronger than death, but that even the strongest love cannot overcome the fundamental nature of reality. That there are boundaries even love cannot cross, not permanently, not without consequence. Perhaps it means that doubt is our greatest enemy, that in the moment when we need to trust most, when everything depends on faith, that's when doubt strikes hardest and deepest. Perhaps it means that some losses cannot be recovered from, that some griefs are so profound they reshape us entirely, and the person we were before the loss can never exist again. Or perhaps it means that even in failure, even in loss, there is beauty, that Orpheus's love for Eurydice was so powerful it gave him courage to face death itself, that he was willing to risk everything for even the smallest chance of getting her back. That love like that, even if it ends in tragedy, is still worth having, worth celebrating, worth remembering. The ancient Greeks told this story over and over, generation after generation, for thousands of years. And we still tell it today, thousands of years later, because something in it speaks to something fundamental in the human heart. We all know what it is to love. We all know what it is to lose. And we all know that moment of doubt when everything depends on trust and we find it so hard to give it. The story reminds us that love is precious and fragile and powerful all at once, that it can move us to extraordinary acts of courage, that it can break us into pieces, that it can endure beyond death, beyond reason, beyond everything. Orpheus loved Eurydice so much that he descended into the underworld for her. He faced every terror, overcame every obstacle, moved the unmovable god of death himself. And in the end, what defeated him wasn't any external force. It was his own heart, his own inability to trust in what he couldn't see. Perhaps that's the saddest part of the story, that he was so close that if he had just believed, just had faith for a few more steps, everything would have been different. But perhaps that's also what makes the story so human, so real, because we've all been there, haven't we? We've all been at that moment where trust is required and doubt creeps in. We've all looked back when we should have kept going forward, and perhaps the story tells us that this is okay, that this is simply what it means to be human, to love imperfectly, to fail at the moments that matter most, and to somehow continue living with those failures, carrying them with us, like Orpheus carried his grief. And so ends the tale of Orpheus and Eurydice, a story of love and loss, of courage and doubt, of journeys taken and prices paid. We've traveled far together tonight, you and I. We've been to the underworld and back. We've seen the depths of grief and the heights of love. We've witnessed a tragedy that has echoed through thousands of years, that still has the power to move us, to make us think about our own loves, our own losses, our own moments of doubt. I hope the story has given you something, even if that something is just a space to rest, a place to let your mind wander while your body relaxes into sleep. Stories like this one have been told since humans first sat around fires and looked up at the stars. We tell them because we need them, because they help us make sense of the world, because they remind us that we're not alone in our experiences, that others have felt what we feel, have struggled with what we struggle with. Love and loss, trust and doubt, courage and fear. These are universal human experiences, and the story of Orpheus and Eurydice speaks to all of them. Wherever you are right now, whatever you're feeling, I hope you can rest easy. I hope you can let go of the day's worries, the day's stresses, the day's sorrows. Tomorrow will come soon enough with all its challenges and opportunities. But for now, in this moment, you can simply be. Let the story fade now, like a dream fading upon waking. Let the images blur and soften. Let your breathing slow and deepen. Let your body sink into rest. If you're still awake, that's perfectly fine. Sometimes we need to lie quietly with our thoughts. Sometimes the story gives us things to think about, and that's good too. But if you feel ready to sleep, then sleep. Let yourself drift away. The world will still be here in the morning. The sun will rise again as it always does, and you'll face whatever comes with whatever strength you have, and that will be enough. It will always be enough. Thank you for listening to this story. Thank you for spending this time with me here in the quiet dark, sharing in this ancient tale. It's been an honor to tell it to you. Until next time, wherever you are, whatever you're feeling, be gentle with yourself. Be kind to yourself. Remember that you're doing better than you think you are. Sleep well, rest deeply, and may your dreams be gentle and kind. Good night.